Oh, hey. A few quick things before we get into the meat of the matter. First off, if you are a columnist or a commentator from outside of Ontario, you don't get to tell us about the Fords as though we don't know them, right? We've been living with the Fords, especially if you're from Toronto. We've been living with the Fords for a good long time. I think we have a pretty good, clean insight into their essential nature. We're not really at this point prone to fundamental misunderstandings about the way they act or their motivations. So if you are one of those people who are like, you know, I think those Ontarians are just misunderstanding this Doug Ford guy. We're not. We're not. Even the people who like him know what he is. They like him because of what he is. They don't misunderstand. And in fact, I think you'll find that the people who like him and the people who don't like him have about the same impression of him. Just for some it's positive, and for others it's very negative. I'm not quite sure how those, demographic lines divide between the people who like him and people who don't. Topic for another video for sure. Yeah, we get it. We know the Fords. We know who the Fords are. We know them very fucking well. Thank you very much. Number two is that that video of AOC talking to Elon Musk. I saw someone describe it as like great political comms. No, I'm sorry, that's wrong. That is incorrect. Maybe it's just because I don't like watching people eat, like on video. Like I went sitting across the table from my kids. I don't mind watching them eat, especially if they're eating. That in itself is a joy. But just like the nose up shot and then slowly picking away at a single chicken tender while you're slagging Elon Musk, which I'm fine with, by the way. I don't know. It's a fine video. It's fine, okay? It's fine. I'm not riffing on AOC. People love AOC. Not riffing on her. I'm just saying it's not an example of like great political comms. It's an up-the-nose eating video that just happened to be on a topic that that person liked. That's why they thought it was so great. Okay. Cool. Maybe we should move on to the big business of this week. Okay, let's get to the meat of the matter, and that's obviously the contract dispute and now labor action from the educational support workers. And I think the thing that's bothered me the most about this story, at least the way it's been reported, is that the contract demands of the workers are getting a lot of attention and the contract proposals of the government are not getting nearly as much. And obviously that has to do with the fact that the workers initially asked for an 11% raise, which I think even the most progressive-minded of us would have a hard time finding the gumption to ask for, whether you need it or not. And we can talk about that in a second. But what doesn't get, that's like first paragraph, 11%. It's been reduced to 6, whatever. 11%, first paragraph. 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th paragraph, you see what the government offered in response. They offered, and there's a threshold, I think around $39,000. So if you made below the threshold, you got 2.5% a year. If you made above the threshold, you got 1.5% a year. Originally, it was 2% and 1.25%. But they were feeling generous, so they found that 0.25% there. 1.5% a year in 2022 is basically a pay cut. And smarter people than me can do the math on this, but I'm thinking that 2.5% is pretty damn close to a pay cut too. So for workers above that threshold, the government offered them a pay cut. And that's halfway down the page when you're reading a story about this. What the workers asked for in return was an 11% increase. And that's where all the debate is. Is it reasonable to ask your boss for an 11% increase? Or, to put it in the far grosser framing, I would say, is it reasonable for the taxpayers of Ontario to have to fund an 11% tax increase? It's weird to me how the concept of you get what you pay for never gets applied to public service. Well, it never gets applied to public service by people who aren't that interested in paying for public service, but who would also very quickly call for the manager in a restaurant if they didn't think they were getting enough value on their chimichanga. Did I just date myself making a chimichanga joke? Probably, I don't care. Yeah, value, you get what you pay for. If you expect someone with a very difficult job to live, actually, let me stop myself right there. That's another thing that bothers me. We talk about how much money you need to live in the province of Ontario. And that value, that dollar figure of how much you need to live in the province of Ontario, keeps going up, 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 up. Inflation has not helped, but it was getting more and more expensive every year, even before the pandemic and the post-pandemic inflation. It was very expensive. And we talk about what do people need to live on, right? That living wage figure, which I think is extremely unhelpful, probably a topic for another day. Because like so many minimums, it just sets a threshold. Oh, well, I'm paying my people at least this value from a fucking website that I don't know who created, and I don't know what metric they used to calculate that figure, 2208 in the city of Toronto. Where'd that come from? I don't know. Who cares? It's a figure that we can meet. Race to the bottom shit right there. Anyway, I'm not here to rant about the living wage. That's another, about the living wage website and the numbers that they come up with. That's for another day. I'm taking issue with the concept of what do you need to live. Well, what we should be asking is what do people need to prosper, to live a prosperous life? And certainly those two lines have got to be different. So if you're making $39,000 as an education worker, doing some difficult work, can you live a prosperous life? And don't we want the people who do this important work, and I'm not just thinking about educational assistants, teachers, nurses, the people on whose backs our entire society rests, don't we want them to be able to live a prosperous life? Not just live? Because that's where we're at right now. We're at a point where people are just getting by. And that's the standard. That's the threshold against which everything is judged. Can you get by? How much does it cost to get by in the city of Toronto? How much does it cost to own a home and get by in the province of Ontario? What a terrible metric. And what an awful way to manage a society. It doesn't matter how much is the minimum, absolute minimum. It matters how much it costs to live and, I don't know, enjoy your life. Don't you want nurses who take care of you, on which, you know, your survival may depend, to feel fulfilled, to be happy? Wouldn't that make things better? In the last 24 hours, they've been saying this all week, but in the last 24 hours, it's ratcheted up. Ford and Stephen Lecce have been talking about how they're doing everything they can to get students back in class. Their only priority is to get students back in class. I think that's probably true in one way, insofar as getting students back in class without giving on anything counts as a big win for them. But it's clear that they're not doing everything in their power. What they mean by that is that they're using every legal trick, every overreach of power that they can think of to get students back into the classroom. When there's one thing that would end this whole fracas like that. Snake. How convenient, snakes. Anyway, timely, on topic. So there's one thing that they could do that would end this thing like that, and that is come back to the table and open up their fucking wallet, right? Because if you put this thing in a pot for 15 hours and boil it down, what you're gonna be left with is a difference of opinion or a difference of ideology about how much money education workers should be paid, right? Or perhaps how much money anybody in the public service should be paid. The Ford government wants to offer what's essentially a pay cut. The workers want to go for a pay increase that's substantial enough to actually change their quality of life, which they reduced, by the way, from 11% to 6%. And still, the only thing the Ford government will accept is a pay cut. So they're not doing everything they could to end this, because everything they could do to end this is to put their shit aside and open up their wallets, which is the one thing they absolutely won't do. So, are they doing everything to get kids back into the classroom? Of course not. Do they ever have any intention of that? No, because is getting kids back into the classroom their actual priority? No. No. Crippling the public sector unions is their actual priority. Now, maybe they've gone too far. Maybe. The private sector unions, well, they're not so chilly on Doug Ford. Certainly they weren't in the last election. In fact, some of them, like the construction workers union, LIUNA, they were positively endorseful of the Ford government. Now maybe they're having second thoughts, but we'll see. We will see. And that takes us to number 3. There are people out there who think this could be the start of the next great labor renaissance. That this could finally wake people up to the forces that are aligned against them, aligned against their chance at a better life, at living beyond just that bare threshold of living and moving into prospering and thriving. But I gotta tell you, I'm doubtful. And I'm doubtful because in order for this thing to really take off, and I mean get huge, to turn into the kind of movement that changes societies, the private sector unions have to get on board too. In the end, we all kind of have to get on board, but let's just start with the next immediate steps. Having the other public sector unions on board, that's great. That's a lot of people. That represents a lot of Ontarians. A lot of Canadians, for that matter, when you add them all together. But it's the private sector unions that matter. Because it's private business that these guys like Doug Ford really care about. They don't really care about the public service. In fact, they're trying to bleed it. So you know they don't care about it all that much. But they care an awful lot about business. And if business is able to chug along while the schools are closed, then this just becomes a political play. If businesses get interrupted, especially businesses that in Doug Ford's case he cares about in particular, like development, like construction, like the auto sector, that could move the needle. But all these like thoughts and prayers we stand with, you know, like LIUNA and other unions talking about how they stand with the education workers. Well, they stand with them at a considerable remove so far, right? No doubt there are members of those unions who are down at Queen's Park today protesting, but stand with means like, okay, we're going to tell our workers it's okay to wildcat if they want to walk off the job even though they have a contract, to illegally strike. That's when you know you're really serious. We stand with you on Twitter isn't really standing with anybody at all, right? There's no standing with someone virtually. You're either standing right next to them and you're taking on the same risks that they are, or you're not standing with them at all. And I think that if the other unions, the private sector unions, are only willing to virtually stand, they're not willing to take on any risk, then, well, then it's curtains for the education workers. They're ultimately going to lose this thing, or there are, although there's a the most chaotic, most grimly comedic outcome is the most likely. That's a concept, and the most grimly comedic concept would be that the teachers refuse to go to work. The only enforcement tool that the Ford government has is to fire them all, and there are no education workers and the schools have to stay closed anyway. That would be the most grimly comic outcome of this, because so many of these problems are of the Ford government's own making, so why shouldn't the problem get worse because of their actions? It actually makes a lot of sense when you think about it in that respect. So that's it for this video, such as it is. More to come from the beautiful Don Valley of Toronto. I have my problems with this city, but it is nice to be able to walk 10-15 minutes from my house and get into this kind of beautiful, quiet nature. Part of the video from a babbling brook, part of the video from underneath a train overpass, and now here with the apartment buildings of Flemington Park, I think? Must be, yes. And unfinished trails that have been sitting there derelict for several years behind me. What better place to talk about the problems of our society? Okay, until next time, bye-bye.